We'll be starting in a minute, and welcome to everybody online. This is the first in what will be a series of seminars throughout the year in corpus linguistics. It's the first that we're holding jointly with Shanghai International Studies University, so welcome to colleagues in Shanghai to this seminar. Next month the seminar will be given by Brezina. I'll send you a note about that later on. Again, it'll be in this room with our colleagues in Shanghai online, and it'll all be about LANA-CASE, as you can probably guess. And then during term time for the rest of the year, and hopefully next year too, we'll carry on with the joint symposium with Shanghai. And each month you'll get a new person talking to you about current research in corpus linguistics. Including Paul's January. Okay, Paul is in January. So you'll find out more about the image analysis then. Okay, good. But today it's a delight to start the seminar series by talking about very new work. So I'll introduce Lizzie Hanks from Northern Arizona University to you. Lizzie is, as you will see, a person who's doing an incredible amount on this project. This is a project, as you can see, to build a corpus of spoken American English. Now I'll move to the first slide. We're building a corpus called LANA, a Lancaster-Northern Arizona corpus. It will have two components, the written component and the spoken component. That's the Lancaster-Northern Arizona corpus of written English, and then the Lancaster-Northern Arizona corpus of American spoken English. Why are we doing this, you might think? Surely there is a corpus out there of American spoken English. No, would be my answer, at least in terms that you might conceive of such corpora from the point of view of, say, the BNC. The BNC in 1994, when it was created, had this very large conversational English component to it, both context governed and demographic, about 10 million words. When we recreated the corpus in 2014, we focused on conversational, spontaneous English in the home, because that's the hardest type of data to collect. Nowadays, you might be able to get TV talk shows, or you might be able even to just gather information from security cameras, etc., in order to find out about speech. What you can't do, unless you're Samsung or some of these organizations that have televisions that eavesdrop on people watching them, is go into people's home and capture language in that social context, which of course is key. So what we want to do is build an American spoken English corpus like that. The one that's closest to it, I think it's fair to say, is probably the Santa Barbara corpus, which was built some years ago. But that has real issues. It's heavily skewed to large urban populations. It's heavily skewed towards male speakers from memory. And it's also heavily skewed towards the middle classes. So one of the things we decided when we started this is we want to reach the hard to reach populations. We want, insofar as is practically possible, to build a corpus of conversational American spoken English, which actually covers the whole of the US and a full range of demography, including maybe even speakers from some of the autochthonous populations there. But certainly I think one of my mantras is I'm as interested in English spoken in South Dakota as I am in English spoken in LA. So that makes our job very challenging. Lizzie will be talking to you about that challenge in a moment. So that's what we're talking about today, the spoken component of this corpus. And really, of course, when you work with such spoken corpora, you need to think about all of these issues if you're going to achieve the objective that I've just set out for you. If you want to build a spoken American conversational corpus that is broadly representative of spoken American English in the US, you need to think about all of these issues. And I'll let Lizzie talk to you about them now. I'll come back at the end and you'll see a bit more of me then. But now over to Lizzie, who's really done all of the hard work on this. Lizzie.
Thank you so much. So let's before we even get started, we definitely want to acknowledge all the people who have helped with this corpus and made it possible. Here's our amazing transcription team. We also have collaborators who worked on data management, collaborators who worked on recruitment, and contributors who worked on recruitment as well. And this slide in particular is so exciting for me to see the widespread of people who have helped all the way across the United States and in the UK as well, of course. So let's start with design. We designed the corpus following the suggestions proposed by Egbert, Biber, and Gray in their Designing a Corpus book. And that includes describing and operationalizing the domain, planning the sample, and then evaluating our sample. If we start looking at describing the domain, this is our target language variety that we're aiming to collect and that we're aiming to represent in our corpus. And that, as Tony mentioned, is conversation, unplanned and unedited, and in American English in particular. And when we think about this, this encompasses a really wide variety of speakers, including from different demographics and including in particular communicative contexts as well. This is what we're aiming to represent, and in order to do that, we had to operationalize the domain, to think specifically about what we can do to take steps towards representing this target domain. And to do that, we decided on two things. The first is that we're going to collect data from people who are 18 years old or over. The reason for that is ethical reasons, of course. And the second decision we made is that participants must have lived in the United States since before elementary school, so since they were about 5 years old. And if we think about this, as we saw in the previous slide, American English encompasses such a wide variety of different types of speakers. And so in order to make this corpus comparable in some ways, as much as possible, to the BNC 2014, we made this decision. Then we went into planning the sample, where we set actual plans in place for how we can go about collecting this data. We decided to collect conversations between 2 or 3 people only. And this is because, based on the work done, again, in the BNC 2014, we saw that transcription can get really, really challenging, in particular with larger groups of interlocutors. And so that first decision is a logistical decision that we made to aid in the transcription process, which, again, we'll talk about later. The conversations themselves can be any length, because that's how we use conversation on a day-to-day basis. We have short conversations in the hallway, and then we have longer conversations during a meal, for example. We followed the same method for collecting data as was used in the BNC 2014, where there's one recorder, we call them, and this recorder was and is the person who is responsible for collecting the consent forms from the interlocutors. They record the conversations that they have, and these are the people who will submit the conversations as well. And last but not least, we decided that this was really important to adopt an iterative sampling process. So instead of just casting a wide net and collecting all the data we can and calling that it, we've decided to continuously evaluate what data we've been receiving so that we can address issues, address gaps, and go forward in a way that makes the corpus as representative as possible. All those decisions being made, we needed to evaluate how well we've done so far in planning a sample that represents our target domain, which is conversations of American English. And this is a step that we've done throughout the process as well, because this is an iterative process. There are strengths and weaknesses, of course, some limitations in our design of this corpus, and we could talk a long time about all of the strengths and limitations, but for now, let's just stick with this list. First of all, the fact that we have participants who have lived in the US since they were 5 is a somewhat maybe restrictive sense of what American English actually encompasses. And so that is one thing to be aware of, that could be a limitation of the corpus, but in some ways it's also a strength, depending on what you choose to do with the data in the corpus. Again, we have smaller conversation groups, so that's something to be aware of. Some of the strengths here is that it's adaptive. The corpus that we're building and our process for it is iterative, so we're adapting as we go. And then last, it is designed to be comparable to the Spoken BNC 2014, which will allow for lots of comparative studies down the line. Let's go into sampling. And once we design the sample, we can actually start going forward and collecting data. And sampling has two aspects. One of them is what to sample, and then the second is how much of this data to sample. When we look at what to sample, again, we want this corpus to be comparable to the BNC 2014. So we chose a couple participant demographics to guide our search for data. And these are the sampling criteria that we chose. Specifically, we looked at age, race, ethnicity, participant region, and geographic location. So either urban or suburban, or on the other hand, rural. And we chose these partly because we did want the corpus to be comparable to the BNC, but also because these variables we believe are quite important for language use and could yield some interesting research. In addition to a variety of participant demographics that we wanted to collect, we also want to find a wide variety of different communicative contexts. So we're also looking for communicative contexts that vary in the conversations we're collecting. So they vary by the purpose that they have, they vary by the relationship between the interlocutors, they vary in the different settings. So some are recorded in a restaurant versus being recorded in a car or at home and things like that. So while these variables are what's guiding our search, we're also collecting a lot of other data about the conversations and the people who are submitting these conversations. So this is all of the additional metadata that we're collecting. You can take a second to look at that, related to language, education, related to locations where they've lived in the United States. We thought about how much to sample as well. This is a big question. In terms of the size of the full corpus, we want to create a spoken conversational corpus that is as large as possible, and we're aiming for between 7 million and 10 million words. In terms of how much from each of these different demographic groups to collect, we've used data from the US Census about the population of the United States to guide our search in those areas as well. Now we can get to the really nitty-gritty about data collection and how we're actually going about collecting this data. And we will, of course, start with the challenges, because there have been many challenges. Two of the biggest challenges that we're grappling with throughout this process are here. And the first is that us researchers, we don't have access to all, or even probably I would say most of the populations that we're interested in. And so that makes it really challenging for us to find ways to access these populations and get them to submit data, ask them, invite them to contribute to the corpus. So that's been a big challenge. The second big challenge here is that the activities that we're asking participants to complete in order to contribute to the corpus are much more time intensive than most research studies. I think, asking participants to complete a survey is already challenging enough, but the fact that we're asking participants to not only complete a couple surveys, but we're also asking them to record their own conversations and submit their own conversations, which entails, first of all, them being willing to sort of have, a recorder and sort of trusting us with their personal lives a little bit. But also it requires that our participants are thinking about the project beyond just the first time that they hear about it. So those have been two overarching challenges. We've come up with some ways to alleviate them a little bit. We haven't eradicated them, of course. But some possible solutions we've been working with here is building rapport with our participants and building a level of trust that will allow them to feel more comfortable sharing their conversations with us. We send personalized emails when participants sign up so that they know that we value them, because we really do value each person who signs up. Of course, now we have quite a lot of participants. We have thousands at this point, which is really wonderful, but it does make it a little harder to send personalized emails, but we do try our best. Send reminders and respond really quickly when they email us. And keeping an active presence on social media has been another huge help. We'll talk about social media a little bit more, but making sure that they can see us, making sure that we're present and they know that we're not just going to take their conversation and run away with it has been helpful. And then sending remuneration in a timely manner. When we tell them they're going to get payment on this date, we actually send it on this date, so they know that we follow through. Of course, incentives has also been really helpful for collecting data here. We have monetary incentives, so participants are paid for every 2 hours of conversation that they submit. Of course, the conversations participants record can be any length. So participants will send in usually a couple different conversations, and as soon as they add up to 2 hours, that's when they'll be paid. The thing is, we don't necessarily want every participant to, sit down, plan 2 hours of their life just to record a conversation for this corpus. We want the data to be a little more natural, so we encourage participants to send in shorter recordings, and that's where the monthly raffle comes in. So every recording that a participant sends in enters them in to win an additional gift card, and that, we hope, does help participants feel like they can really record any and all of the conversations they're having on a day-to-day basis. And it turns out it seems to be helping. In our data right now, we have as short as 2 minutes conversation all the way up to 5 hours, I think, is our longest conversation. Surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly for everyone here, but surprisingly for me, monetary incentive is not enough to get participants to submit. So we have to actually pique their interest and make them excited about contributing to the corpus. It turns out that most of the people who are mostly in it for the money and email us all the time, like, when am I getting paid? When am I getting paid? Usually these are the people who won't actually follow through with all the steps and submit everything correctly like they're supposed to. It's the people who are actually interested in the project and will email us and say, wow, this is so cool that you're doing this. I'd love to contribute. And then these are the people who will follow through and actually submit everything. So in order to pique their interest, we started the social media, which also has been helpful for building rapport. And you'll see next, it's also really helpful for recruitment. So we like to pique their interest about linguistics generally and about the project in specific. And actually, some people in this room have participated in the social media, so thank you to everyone who's done that. Finally, we have monthly submission deadlines. At first, we told participants they can submit whenever they would like, and we never received submissions. And so we now have a deadline every month on the 15th, and it turns out we get most of our submissions on the 14th or the 15th. So the monthly submission deadline is really, really helpful. Along with this, we've tried tons of recruitment strategies. We've piloted these and others that are not listed up here to see what works best. And after piloting, we then have continued with the strategies that do work best for our project. And so I will show you here. Hope you like my little transitions. These ones in green, these have been the most successful recruitment strategies, and these are the ones that we want to continue. So we'll talk briefly about each of these. First is offering extra credit to students who choose to submit conversations. This has been really helpful. First of all, the data is free because the students are getting extra credit, but also it's really helpful because these students are usually super on top of things and they'll submit things and they'll make sure everything's in order when they submit, which is great. Historically, I say historically, but we've only been collecting data for about a year, but in the past, we didn't have any restrictions on the students on basically who they could record with and things like that. And that ended up, as you could imagine, skewing the data a little bit towards these college-aged groups. This past semester, we've asked students to record conversations with people who are over 40 years old, and that has been really helpful for sort of balancing out the data a little bit more. Double payment incentives have been really helpful. We've actually only done it once so far, but we're planning another one. And basically participants are paid double for their contributions. The 1 month we did it, we received about over 100 hours, so it's been really helpful. Inviting personal contacts or friends and family who'd like to participate. And posting recruitment videos on social media. We already talked about that a little bit, but through social media and specifically TikTok, actually, we've recruited about 88% of our participants. So without social media, in this case, we would not be sort of where we are with the corpus right now. Along that same line, we've also hired social media influencers who share the project with their followers on social media, and that's been really successful in bringing more participants in from diverse populations as well. We had one influencer who basically talks about life in the South, and so from that we were able to get lots of participants who live in the South to submit. We've got some that they've been somewhat successful, and we are sort of continuing these, but putting them just a little bit on the back burner. Sending emails to trade schools and community colleges, so places like massage schools or blacksmithing institutions, which do exist. And it turns out we get some non-traditional students from these groups, which has been really helpful. And then publishing stories in regional newspapers. It's really exciting to see some news outlets picking up this story and writing about it. We had a story in Arkansas come out recently, and that helped us get some new participants from Arkansas. Last, here are some methods that we're not going to continue because in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, the other methods outweigh these. Not to say that these haven't brought in new participants, just that the other methods have been more successful. Two notable ones here. The first is contracting a market research panel. We found a market research panel who specializes in finding participants for projects just like this, for research projects. And they found 500 participants for us from these underrepresented groups that we really needed more representation in. And they did a great job of finding the participants, but unfortunately, these participants were not generally interested in the project. At that point, they're from this pool of people who are interested in the monetary remuneration aspect. And likely because of that, we didn't actually receive many conversations from this pool of participants. Another notable one is advertising on Hulu. We created an advertisement, put it on Hulu, and it was shown to around 40,000 people across the United States in different areas where we needed more representation from. And we did get 2 participants from this, which is awesome, which is really great because, especially because they are from these underrepresented groups that we needed. But again, it's not as efficient of a method as some of these other methods. I will show you, we have 1 second here, the advertisement that we did show on Hulu. This advertisement features the first publicly available conversation from our corpus as well. Sorry, that was a little small because it was on TikTok, but hopefully you were able to read that or catch on to some of that. Finally, we have a couple more methods that we're still testing out, and we still want to see how these recruitment methods will go in the long run. So we've collected the data, which is wonderful. We have hundreds of hours of conversation recordings. Then, of course, the next really important step is transcription. As we all know, transcription is so vital to a spoken corpus because the quality of the transcription will influence what types of research can be done on the corpus, and not just what types, but also what quality of research can be done using that corpus. Of course, transcription is challenging because it's really resource intensive, as we all know. So it's really important to us that our transcripts are as high quality as possible, understanding that there are limitations to the resources that we have access to. And so with that goal in mind, to create these transcripts that are really high quality, we've conducted 3 different case studies to help us understand how we can most efficiently transcribe this data. So we'll briefly go through each of these case studies. The first one, the spoken BNC 2014 was actually transcribed manually. So the transcribers listened and wrote every single utterance in that corpus from scratch without any help. And the reason for this is because at the time, the automated transcription software wasn't advanced enough to actually aid the transcribers. It turned out that transcribing from scratch was faster than transcribing with the help of an automated software. But it's been a couple years since that corpus was compiled, and so we thought, let's try it again and let's see if the transcription software at this point has advanced to the point where it can actually be helpful. What we did is we looked at a couple files from our corpus and we tested 3 different methods. And the first was Otter. Maybe some people have heard of Otter. Yeah, so it's a software that will, automatically transcribe, but of course it requires manual checking afterwards. Same thing with Sonics plus manual transcription afterwards, or manual checking. And then the third method was transcribing from scratch, as they did in the BNC 2014. And I'll show you here our results. So here's the first one. This is the output from Otter. And I will play the audio for you while you read the transcript. And while you're listening, just take a look at the transcript and see what maybe some of the strengths and the weaknesses of this software are. So some strengths that we noticed is it does capture many of the words correctly, which is nice. There was some overlap around here that wasn't captured at all. We can see that there were 3 speakers. It sounds like there are 3 speakers, but there's only 2 recorded here. And it turns out with Otter, we ended up getting a lot of longer paragraphs almost, so it didn't recognize speaker turns as much. Then there's British spelling, which maybe we would want to avoid for an American English minor detail. When we did this method, it actually took 15 minutes to transcribe each minute of the conversation, which is quite a long time. Here's the next one. This is the output from Sonics. Again, I'll play it for you and you can read the transcript. So some strengths here, again, many of the words are captured. We are missing some, so he started crying now, and that's not exactly what she said. We can see it was a little better with identifying the different speaker turns. This is Sonics, and it took 8.5 minutes to transcribe each minute of conversation, which is about twice as fast as Otter, which is really amazing. But now the big question is this going to be faster than manual transcription? And that's what we did next. And you can see this transcript. I won't ask you to point out the limitations of this transcript because it's beautiful. It's exactly what we want. It's got all of our conventions and everything. Let's play it just so you can see. Ta-da! It took 10 minutes to transcribe each minute of conversation with manual transcription. So it turns out that they're all talking. Turns out that Sonics is actually the most efficient method to transcribe, which is really surprising and really wonderful. Advantages of Sonics is that it acknowledges various speaker turns, and it transcribes based on custom dictionaries as well, so we don't have to worry about British spelling anymore. Some disadvantages is there is a fee involved, so if you wanted to use Sonics for your own project, just be aware of that. And then the speaker identification is not very accurate. While Sonics will identify different speaker turns, it will know when someone different is speaking. It's not great at deciding who is actually speaking when. And that's when this next case study came about, is related to speaker identification. This is also called speaker diarization. It's deciding who spoke and when they spoke it. This is super challenging. And actually that's not something that I even believed at first. Even after reading all of the research and hearing from all these people who have experience with speaker diarization, I couldn't fathom the idea that attributing utterances to the correct speaker with just a group of 2 or maybe 3 people would be that challenging, but actually it really, really is. And I will show you on the next slide some examples of that. But it's very challenging, but of course it's really important, because if we have all these utterances attributed to an incorrect speaker from a different demographic group, our findings about this demographic group might be a little bit off. And an additional challenge here is that our transcribers are based in Lancaster University in the UK. And so we were wondering, well, I wonder if dialect plays a role here. If our speakers who are most familiar with British English are listening and transcribing American English, perhaps that's adding an extra level of complexity that could potentially be avoided. And so that's what we did in the second case study. We tested it out with diarization from an American English speaker, followed by transcription by a British English speaker, or diarization by a British English speaker, followed by transcription by a British English speaker. And we compared the time overall to see which was most efficient. And here, I'll show you the results in a second, but first I'll play a clip that maybe can illustrate, at some cases it can be challenging to determine speakers. So that can be a little challenging, as you heard, especially when they start muttering, especially when they're quiet for a while. You know, you feel like you've got it, and then they're quiet for a while, and then they start talking, and then you're like, oh, who started talking? And so it can be pretty challenging. That recording, by the way, is pretty interesting. They're sitting in a parking lot, and there was a fight happening on the other side of the parking lot. So they're talking about that fight. But here are the results. With American English diarization followed by transcription, it took 9 minutes to transcribe each minute of conversation. And then with British English diarization followed by British English transcription, It took about 9.8 minutes to transcribe each minute of conversation. And you can see that actually more words were processed per hour with this method. So it turns out that the difference in this case is comparable between these two groups, which was, again, a little bit surprising to us as well, or to me anyways. Based on that, we concluded that the difficulty of speaker identification seems to be about the same, regardless of dialect. But we didn't look into the accuracy of speaker identification. It's possible that maybe the accuracy would be different, but that's something to explore in a future study. Speaking of accuracy, that's where our next case study comes in. Of course, the accuracy of what's actually being recorded is absolutely necessary, really important. And it's really hard with naturalistic data. These participants are recording the data themselves, so they're using usually their phone, which might not have the best quality mic. It might be sort of farther away from them. There might be background noises. So all of these things can make naturalistic data particularly challenging to transcribe. So we were interested to see how much of the data that we're transcribing is actually unclear. How many recordings were so unclear that we couldn't transcribe anything? And how many words and phrases within the transcriptions we have are too unintelligible for transcribers to record? And then lastly, how many speaker IDs were actually uncertain at the end? Utterances that we couldn't accurately and confidently attribute to a speaker. So I'll show you some results. Recordings that were not transcribed due to lack of clarity. There were 4 recordings in the total corpus, which is about 1 file in every 111 that were too unclear to record. So let me show you an example of one of these audio files that we were not able to transcribe. No? You can hear, shut up. Yeah, I was in there. So she's there really clearly, but she's talking to someone else who at some points, it sounded like a male voice at some points, but we couldn't really hear what he was saying. So that was unfortunate. When we received that recording, I was scrubbing through the entire thing, seeing if we could save anything, but yeah, we couldn't hear his voice at all. Next, we looked at how many unintelligible words and phrases were transcribed, and we found that 1 word in every 48 words had been uncertain. And so, just so you know, when we mark uncertainty in the transcripts, there are 2 options. Either the transcriber can say, this is uncertain and I have no idea what it is, or the transcriber can say, I'm not 100% positive that this is the word, but I think it is. But since I'm not positive, I'm going to say it's uncertain and I'm going to guess what the word is. And so that figure includes both of those instances, just where the transcriber is not 100% accurate. I'll play you an example of a recording that had more uncertain words than some of the others. So it's a little challenging. She said like a couple times, the other speaker here, but there were some unintelligible words in the middle. Something that plays into that, as well as the dialect. This speaker is from a dialect that I maybe don't hear as often, and so that could be playing a role as well. But we can see that some of these recordings are pretty challenging. The last one we looked at uncertain speaker IDs. We already listened to a recording where it was sort of challenging to determine who the speaker was. It turns out that 1 in every 40 speaker IDs have been uncertain. Based on that, we concluded that the files overall are intelligible enough to be transcribed, which is really wonderful. It could be that this is a result of the instructions that we provide participants. We basically tell them they're not going to be paid unless their recording is intelligible for at least 90% of it. And so that could be maybe motivating the participants to record in a place and using a microphone that's a little bit higher quality. But individual words and speaker IDs continue to pose a challenge. I think traditionally, in many transcripts, this has been a challenge. In other projects outside of LANA as well. But I think in LANA in particular, based on what we found out from the BNC 2014, in the BNC 2014, Love conducted some similar case studies of uncertainty with the transcribers at the time, and he found that actually the transcribers tended to transcribe confidently, or sometimes, or often I should say, transcribe confidently because we all want to be confident, but sometimes those confident transcriptions were actually not accurate. And so in this case, we wanted to be extra cautious and really encourage our transcribers to use the uncertain tags really often whenever they weren't 100% sure. So it's possible also that this sort of the higher number of uncertain words is due to that, is due to asking our transcribers to be extra cautious. And now the progress to date, we'll talk about progress with data collection, progress with transcription, and then also some ongoing challenges. Progress to date, we have 500 hours collected, which we estimate will turn into about 5 million words of data for the corpus. And we've been, as you know, collecting data from across these different demographics. Some demographics have been a bit challenging, or a bit more challenging than the others. The first is age. We talked about at the beginning how when we offered extra credit to students, our data was being skewed slightly towards these younger age groups. And so now going forward, that's something that we're aiming to remedy is by targeting these people over 40 for the most part. Another challenge here that we actually, or I didn't anticipate per se, was gender. It turns out we're receiving lots of submissions from female participants who, you know, they're with their roommates and it's easy for them to record, and male participants haven't been submitting as much. And so that's something that in the future and right now at the moment we're seeking to remedy. If you look at our transcription, we have about 2 million words transcribed and more coming soon. And so I wanted to take a second to share some of our data with you, our transcribed data. So this is a conversation between 3 friends, and I'd like to invite you to just read through and see what's going on in this conversation.
There's an article about Delulu today in today's Guardian, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the word Delulu.
Amazing.
Yeah, so very on topic.
Okay, that's great. I planned that. Yeah, so we can see this is sort of a lighthearted, fun conversation. I'm guessing it's about like a K-pop concert or something like that. That's a fun one. But we also have some more serious ones. So this is 2 participants talking to each other after a breakup. So we can read that. So it's a bit more emotional. The transcriber for this one actually reported some challenges because there was so much crying that made it hard to transcribe. We have another more serious one. This is a conversation. In this clip, we only have 2 sisters, but it's actually 3 sisters who have reunited after like 10 years apart. So we can read about that. And then the last transcript I'll show you, I think you'll guess what it is from the very beginning.
Oh.
So a conversation with a young child between partners. So this is some of the data we've been getting, and it's been really wonderful to sort of see all these diverse communicative contexts coming in as well from diverse participants as well. So I'll hand it over to Tony for the last part.
Promised I'd come back, or rather I threatened it. Okay, so as you've heard from Lizzie, we've made great progress. The corpus creation process is ongoing. We've only been at it for just over a year, which is incredible. The progress that we've managed to make in just over a year is very good. At the moment, we're training more transcribers, so that should actually speed up the process of data production. And we actually have more data at the moment available. So hopefully, as we keep on bringing in that data, we can keep the transcription process going at a higher rate. So we've managed 2 million words in actually less than a year. So hopefully by this time next year, we might have 5, 6, who knows. And by the end of the project, I hope that we will get more towards the 10 than the 7. Okay, so we do not expect our decisions at any stage of the process to be the only solutions either for us or anybody else. When you're gathering spoken data, as we experienced with the BNC, as we're experiencing again with LANA, you come across a very dynamic context. It's very easy to imagine in advance that everybody will be interested in what you're doing and willing to give you their data. And of course, you discover that some people are, some people aren't, and that starts to generate skew. So we're finding exactly that on this project, but we are coming up with some insights, I think, which are of general value, especially around transcription and the generation of transcriptions swiftly and reliably. So we're going to do a comprehensive evaluation of the whole project, and we will, of course, publish these findings at some point. And of course, the real key will be when the data is available and people can start to do comparative studies of British and American spoken English, something which has been very difficult to do to date. It will still be difficult in future, but you'll be able to do it on a much more sound footing than you've been able to so far. So I think we'll conclude the presentation at this point. There are a few minutes left, so we can take some questions either from here or from colleagues online if